Welcome back to the home front. I'm your host, Reed Galen. Today, I'm once again joined by Abigail Tracy, journalist, lady about town, and all around red blooded and proud American. Abby, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I say that last piece both seriously and a bit tongue in cheek because we are now, as people are listening to this, we will be just about a week into the new era of American politics, Trump 2.0. And it has been quite a ride so far. I'm not sure, as someone who lists their occupation on various social handles as friendly neighborhood Cassandra, I'm surprised. But I'm always surprised by the reaction of people who should not be surprised, whether or not that's our friends in the pro democracy movement, senior Democrats, members of the media, uh, anti authoritarian activists or commentators. It always seems that no matter what happens, no matter what he promises to do, everybody seems surprised by it.
Yeah, I'm a little confused by the fact that there's still this sort of shock and awe reaction to it because we've seen this tape before, be kind, rewind, and we've already done it. And I'm sort of, and Reed and I, like, you and I have talked about this prior, like the idea that there were other kind of guardrails, more guardrails the last time that he was elected. And also he didn't understand sort of the gaps in executive power and sort of the checks and balances that did exist. And he now understands how he can circumvent them. I think even if you're looking at, the idea of like a cabinet member versus like an Elon Musk, who's not a Senate confirmed individual, but who is playing a huge role in terms of influence in the administration. So I think it's like the notion that people are still surprised after 8+ years of this, like I
Yeah.
don't quite get it.
Almost a decade. Yeah. I think this summer
Ugh.
it'll be 10 years since the infamous escalator. And none of us could believe it then, or certainly I don't want to speak for everyone. I couldn't believe it then. I thought it was a joke. I'd go back and read the things I wrote. I thought it would be a lark. And here we are. And to your point, I think it is important to understand that the people around him, and I don't mean the Pete Hegseths and the Pam Bondys and the Bobby Kennedy Juniors of the world, but the people who surround him at the highest echelons of the presidency, those people that would be called assistants to the president, right? The 7, 8, 9 people in the West Wing who have what are called walk-in privileges, right? They can walk into the Oval Office anytime they want. Now, my guess is that the Trump Oval Office is probably more of a revolving door. It's probably like a shopping mall on a Saturday afternoon, right? There's probably people in and out all the time. But my guess is Trump likes that. But the people who have been laying these things out, right? I think we should understand that the Project 2025 stuff didn't start in the fall of 2024. It started in January of 2021. As soon as he was gone, they knew exactly what they wanted to do. These are very smart people. I know personally for years and years, Abby, some of the people that worked on this stuff. These are not dumb people, right? They come out of very, very elite institutions, whether or not it's like the Claremont Institute or someplace else. Many of them have Ivy League degrees. These are not stupid people. And so I think what we get confused with is when we see an interview, say on Comedy Central, with a Trump fan in a red MAGA hat, being made to look ridiculous, with the Ross Votes of the world, who sits at the top of OMB, who has a very clear idea and ideal for him, and ideologically, focused set of things that he wants to get done. And so, to your point about the surprise, it's, well, yeah, you have to separate. And we should be able to do this, gang, intellectually. You have to be able to hold two thoughts in your head, that there are people for whom Trump's policies will be very bad, and they will love him anyway. And there are people for whom these policies will be very good, and they probably hate Trump, right? But they understand that he's a means to an end.
Yes. And can you actually, for the listeners out there, talk about Claremont? I think people don't understand sort of what kind of an incubator that is for some of these things. I think background on that, just a sentence or two might be helpful.
Sure. So, I mean, there's the Claremont McKenna, which is a college in Southern California, sort of east of Los Angeles, but attached to it is the Claremont Institute, which is, for lack of a better way, you know, it is a neo fascist, white nationalist, Christian nationalist think tank, for lack of, it's just, it is a place that has been recruiting and developing people for decades into this stuff. A lot of this stuff did start in Orange County, California, back in the 50s and 60s. The so much of the power of the right wing, Abby, has been an amalgamation of wealthy, typically white men and businesses and religion. And a lot of that at the time was ascribed to anti-communism, right? Communism, at least Soviet communism, was famously atheistic. So it wasn't just that you were pushing back on a political system or a governmental system, but an ideology that was godless in definition. And so it allowed people who were capitalists to mix very easily with people who were God-fearing, and to create this stuff. And as we've talked about before, the stuff that we're seeing come to fruition now is not new. It probably had its last close heyday ideologically in the early Reagan years.
Reagan, yeah.
Yeah. But nothing like they could have imagined now. Right.
Yeah.
George H.W. Bush never really ascribed to that theory. Certainly Bill Clinton, was a proponent of neoliberal economics, outsourcing, those sorts of things. George W. Bush, for whom I worked, was always more conservative than me, but he saw that part as sort of, they were weird, right? Like, remember when he said at Trump's first inaugural, like, that was some weird shit. I think he thought that was, again, they were a necessary evil to whatever it is he had to get done. He's certainly a faithful person, a God-fearing person, someone who takes their faith very seriously, but I always think he thought that they were a little bit too extreme for him. Obviously, Obama didn't see that. And for Trump, to bring it up to the present day, and I wrote about this in the fall of, I guess, 2023, he's a vessel. He doesn't care about any of this stuff, right? For him, you mentioned the word shock and awe. That's what it is. He loves to see the chaos. He loves to see the anger. And if it keeps both the billionaires who sat behind him on Monday afternoon happy, and it keeps the base closer to him, then for him, that's a win-win. And everything else for him, at least in this moment, a positive byproduct.
Yeah, I think the real key when we're talking about Donald Trump is Donald Trump's ideology is Donald Trump.
Hmm.
It is he is constantly trying to figure out a way to boost himself, buttress, his own image and his own branding. And like that is really what it boils down to in terms of like actual policies and lawmaking. He doesn't care.
Right.
What he cares about is himself. And what you have there, if you're an individual who does have a very strong ideology, such as a number of individuals who are now in his administration, who are now pushing policies, like they see an opportunity.
Hmm.
Um, and they see a real opportunity in Donald Trump because as long as they can brand it and shape it and mold that ball of clay into something that is going to make him look better or make him think that he looks better, it's going to happen because he doesn't have these sort of like undergirding principles or an ideology that really is driving him, unlike so many previous presidents. So you see this group of individuals who have wanted so many of these policies and ideas come to fruition. And again, to your point, like he is a vessel for that. And that's really where we are. And it's a scary thing. It is a scary thing to have a president who is so unprincipled. Um, because the reality is it's sort of on the whims of the moment and what is going to make him look better, when in reality, like there are real people in real lives and real individuals who are affected by all of these things. And yet his entire focus is this tunnel vision of how does it make me look? How does this improve my life? He is not ever thinking about anybody other than himself. And that is a terrifying reality to be in as an American.
Well, I think that's right. And there's so many people that he's compared to throughout history. And to your point, he does not have a defined ideology like an Adolf Hitler did. He does not have a Marxist-Leninist ideology, say like a Joseph Stalin or a Mao Zedong did. He's more like Franco in Spain, right? He happened to be in the right place at the right time, and the phalangists win the war, and he's in power for 30 or 40 years. But for him, to your point, it was more about the power, right? He kept the rich people, he kept the Catholics happy. He buried, several 100,000 people. Maybe it's not that many, but it was a lot. And so it was just a means to an end, right? Power was a means to an end, which is I get to be in charge and people do what I ask them to. And I would say just a little bit different on how he looks. It's how he looks with the people he cares about. He doesn't care about upsetting the media. He doesn't care about upsetting Democrats or the left. He knows that he only has to really appeal to a fairly narrow band of people that are the ride or die voters with him, the oligarch class. And a lot of Americans, as we've seen, 5 million or so of them stayed home, and many more. And there's plenty that's being written right now on Substack and other places of, people just tuning out. I've talked to a lot of my friends, Abby, and maybe you have too, although you live in the belly of the beast, where there's like, I just can't handle it right now. I just don't want to deal with it right now. I don't want him to be the middle of everything I think about. And the truth is that's a normal reaction. That is a human reaction to having to contend with something that is really upsetting or off-putting, right? Is to say, I
Yeah.
don't want to deal with this. And that's not to me the same as capitulation. That is self-preservation. That is building up a wellspring of endurance, or refilling the battery, of psychic energy or emotional energy that is necessary at this moment, because practically speaking, there's not a lot we can do. I saw that there was a federal judge who blocked Trump's executive order on birthright citizenship. Okay, great. But we knew that when 20, or was it 18 attorneys general in Democratic states, they went judge shopping. They found one in Seattle. He did what they wanted him to do. Now it's going to go to the 11th Circuit or whatever, and then ultimately it'll go to the Supreme Court. And, the point is that I'm not sure that Trump even cares. The point is that he has thrown yet another bright, shiny object into the ring for everybody to chase. Now, do I think that that's okay? No. The 14th Amendment is very explicit on these things, but we should understand the point of it, right? The point is not necessarily to end birthright citizenship, although I do believe there are many, many people around him who agree with that, and probably a lot more Americans than we'd like to believe. But the more important immediate thing is that while they're going off and doing all these other things, things like the 14th Amendment are keeping, the online the left, levers of power it does have occupied.
Yes, and I do think you're hitting on a really important thing. I think, particularly in his second administration, the reality is there's going to be these moments of bright shiny object over here, media, people pay attention to this, while there is all this other kind of like subversive policy making and things going on. So it's like a distraction method. And I think, after his first term, the individuals that have chosen to surround him and have chosen to be in his administration now, they understand that he can do that, that shock and awe and, say things in his rhetoric and all of these things and draw the attention to that. The scary thing is what is going to be happening on the quietly. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's what people kind of need to focus on. Reed, you and I have talked about this idea of like paying attention to not what he says, but what he does, in terms of being a president, but also, in terms of his administration. And I really do think that that is a key thing moving forward. And I think like one of the other things to recognize is who Donald Trump is and
Mm-hmm.
sort of how he views the world. And one of the, I lived in New York City for a long time. And I think one of the very interesting things about Donald Trump is, very wealthy individual, debatable how much he's actually worth. Real
Right.
estate's a strange, muddy thing. But one of the things is in New York City, there's such a level of supreme wealth and power. And the reality is Donald Trump was never accepted by the extremely wealthy in New York City. He was never accepted by them. He put gold everywhere and he had all this furniture and he was on his reality show and all of these things. But the reality is like the supremely rich and like the supremely wealthy really never let him in the door because their wealth outpaced him to such a degree. And there is this driving force under him where it's just like he's seeking acceptance from a certain class of individuals still. And I do believe that that is driving him. And we even see it, and I think the fact that he's buddying up with Elon Musk, an incredibly wealthy, incredibly powerful individual, is sort of indicative of that. And at the end of the day, like Donald Trump is an insecure human
Hmm.
who is seeking approval. But what is scary is because there is not an underlying ideology or real principles, so to speak, he's going to do whatever he can in pursuit of that acceptance that I think he's always been seeking.
Well, and in I think that's right, and I think Musk has many of those same insecurities, as do I think a lot of those tech guys. Right? They were always nerds, right? They weren't invited to parties; they were in their rooms coding something. And so, yeah, there's this antisocial strain of a lot of the behavior, and you look at he's this week. The big Davos conference was going on in Switzerland, and he participated by video. And there's, Schwartzman from Blackstone, Brian Moynihan from Bank of America, all these people who are asking him all these softball questions. And they're all extolling his economic policies, which are less regulation, lower taxes, as if anybody in Davos needs to worry about any of that. And that's a whole other thing. But he attacked them, right? In particular, Moynihan saying, you need to be nicer to conservatives who want to bank with you. You're debanking people. Now, I never even heard of that till I read this story. But those are exactly the people for whom he would never be accepted, will never be accepted. So when he has the opportunity, he puts them on notice, right? That's how he flexes his power is, well, you may not accept me. You may think I'm a goon and an idiot from Queens, and I've got, ridiculous houses and airplanes and all this other stuff. But I'm in charge now, right? I'm the captain now. And as soon as the video clicks off, that as they're sitting in the chalet drinking hot toddies or doing whatever they're doing, they're still laughing at what an idiot he is and how they're getting one over on him, right? He's giving us everything we want, and all we have to do is say, "Okay, Donald. Okay, Mr. President." And the truth lies somewhere in the middle, which is I think he really does hate those people because they never will accept him. Um,
Yeah.
but again, he is magnetically drawn, as you said, to that hyper wealth. He can't help it. He hates them, but he wants to be part of them. But I think going all the way down to the bottom of the movement, so many of the people that he claims to speak for and feel like he does speak for them feel the same way. They have been alienated culturally, economically, and socially, and he has given them permission over this last 10 years to say, no, it's okay to say F you to all those people that don't like you.
Yeah. Well, and you hit on an interesting point. It's like he's still in pursuit of this approval and this
Mm-hmm.
approval from a certain class of people that arguably is very different than his base,
Mm-hmm.
than the mega base of individuals. And the reality is like Donald Trump loves a crowd, loves a rally, but he doesn't want to necessarily hang out with those individuals that are really his true, red-blooded
No.
supporters. He doesn't. He's still in pursuit of this, but he is able to message in a way to those individuals that you said have felt alienated, have felt pushed aside, have felt like they've been looked down upon. And it's powerful. It's very potent. Obviously, he has now been elected president of the United States twice, and he won the popular vote. He did.
Right.
Those are realities. So there is something, and I think there needs to be a reckoning around Democrats regarding what is it that he is saying that their party is not, that's not working for them. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see what Democrats do over these next couple of years in terms of trying to figure out, what is a way to message their policies that are actually going to improve the lives of so many individuals, but they need a win to be able to make that impact. And I don't know, I think we're at an inflection point, and you know, so many of my friends, as we've discussed, are like They're either fully in and paying attention to every single
Right.
thing Donald Trump is doing, or they're fully disengaged. There's not really something in the middle right now, and I understand it. I think it's a coping mechanism for some folks, but
Well, that's an interesting segue. I mean, I wrote something on Substack earlier this week about the idea that where I live here, there's a local ballot drive or a signature drive to get something on the ballot. Our county council, broke under the pressure of this rapacious developer, and it's brought every. And I live in a fairly liberal enclave in a very red state, but it's brought all the longtime residents. It's brought the new California liberals. It's brought the MAGA guys together, right? Everybody wants in on this fight against this, Goliath. And my part of this was in Ron Fournier, who I had on the show a couple of weeks ago, and who's a longtime reporter for AP and National Journal and is an incredible writer in his own right. And I wrote something similar, which is at some point, if you want to get these people back, whether or not it's the soft Trump voters who just didn't like what Harris had on offer or what Democrats represent, or true independents, or all those Democrats who stayed home, you're going to have to stop telling people you think they're so stupid and that you hope that Trump does his worst and it works out badly for you. Because that, as bad as Trump is, like that's not necessarily a better message, one. And two, if you are an elite Democrat who says to MAGA, I hope everything he does is bad for you and it goes so terribly for your life, the ironic part of that, Abby, is that you will push them further into Trump's arms because you've already told them previously you don't like them, that you think they're stupid and they're mouth breathers. You're just reiterating that point as opposed to trying to draw people back into something that says, he pulled one over on you, right? Twice. You don't have to fall for it again. The things he said he's going to do really are going to hurt you. But you have to get over that sort of anger and elitism that I think really did lead to a lot of what we're seeing now, which is Democrats don't represent the working class as a party. They represent college educated, mostly white people on the coasts or in big cities. And I think that's one thing they're going to have to get over, which is if you really do care about working class voters, whether they be white, Latino, black, Asian, right, then you are, to your point, going to have to speak to them in the idiom that they themselves speak in, but also about the issues they care about. And for a lot of them, they are the third choice, which is they're not the people who have totally tuned out, and they're not the people who are totally sucked in. They're the people who have to get up at 6:30 in the morning, get their kids to school, right? Either go to their job, one of two jobs, or run around. If you're a parent who can stay at home and do the 82 different things you got to do during the day, you get your kids back at 2:30. Then you have to deal with them all afternoon in activities, or childcare, whatever it is. Then you have to make dinner. Then you have to get everybody off to bed. And by the time you're done for the day, it's 10 o'clock and you're exhausted, right? And if you're not telling someone how in the course of that day, you're going to try and make their life better or at least take some of the pressure off, then why would they listen to you? Why would they give you the time of day?
well, I absolutely agree. And I think to really boil it down, nobody wants to hear I told you so. That's what it is. Nobody wants
Right.
that. That's literally what it is. Like nobody wants somebody to say, told you so. Like
Nanny,
it
nanny, nanny,
is,
boo boo. Right. Nobody digs that.
yeah, it's like it is truly like a string of words that nobody wants to hear. And
Mhm.
frankly, when people do hear it, they get angrier and like more resentful of it. So it's like, don't do that. It's
Right.
not a good message to anybody, but like really that's what it boils down to. It's like, yes, he might enact policies and he might push policies forward and legislation that really negatively impact people, but those individuals do not want to hear from the Democratic Party told you so. Like
Right.
nobody wants to hear that. And I think full stop, like that really is what it boils down to.
Well, and I think the flip side too is there's also, I think, for a lot of otherwise would be Democratic voters would say, well, where you been? Now you care? Now you're here? And I think that's one thing, having spoken to many, many activists over the course of the last couple of years, is they feel taken for granted. There was an expectation that because the Democratic Party or the top of the ticket said you need to show up or the world's going to end, they didn't buy it. And so from my perspective, the Democrats have it's a brand problem, which I hate to use the word, but it is, which is they have as big a problem, maybe a bigger problem, Abby, with their base than they do with suburban women, right? They got a problem with suburban women, but they've always had a problem with suburban women. They have a problem with people who are supposed to be the ones who show up time and time again for their candidates and now aren't, even when they know what the other option is.
Well, and that's a problem. I think oftentimes, and we sort of saw some of this writing on the wall throughout the election.
Mm.
There were these surveys done where voters that perhaps traditionally might have fallen into demographics that would have skewed Democratic were asked about, the candidates, and they're just like, I don't know which one's going to be better for me. Like, I
Right.
don't like there was this gap where they're like lesser of two evils. Like there wasn't any sort of salient reason to turn out for these individuals in either direction. And I think that's a problem. And I think that's a messaging problem in terms of the Democratic Party broadly.
Well, and I think also there might be, and this is a little bit of strategic political advice, that if you're a Democrat in a state, in a swing state or in a swing district, you might be better off saying Republicans are doing these things. Republicans in Congress, Republicans in the Senate are doing these things because it's going to require their approval to get these things done. Take your pick. Because Trump is so big in so many people's minds. It's not that they think he's unconquerable, although I think a lot of people might feel that way at this moment. I can understand why. It's that you have to take out the foundation of his support governmentally, which is going to be members of the U.S. House, members of the U.S. Senate, and frankly, a lot of these goons in the states, in some of these very, very red states, and I want to get to one of them in a second, right, who provide the basis of support for him and for his policies and will help him carry out the worst of them. And so if you just lay everything at the feet of Trump, there's just a lot of people who I think just say, you keep saying that. You've been saying that for 10 years. I just don't buy it anymore. Where is I think Republicans are a perfectly legitimate and probably more salient target because the truth is most voters in the United States are fickle anyway. They don't really like anybody. And so if you can pin it on that party as to say, well, yeah, they're going to cut your Social Security or look, they don't care about your kids or whatever the message is going to be, maybe that's more effective. You'd certainly try it out. But in that vein, can I give you my moron of the week? This is going to be an irregular and perhaps never to happen again feature.
Always,
So
as long as it's not me.
right, no, no, no. Well, we'll get back to you certainly. Okay, so here in Utah, where I live, the legislature runs for 45 days every year. It's a very fast thing, and the legislature here in Utah is very weird. First of all, it runs everything. Spencer Cox, our governor, is a rubber stamp. The Republicans, not surprisingly, because they have such an overwhelming supermajority in both houses, if Spencer Cox doesn't like something and he vetoes it, they just come back into session and override it. So we have a dictatorship of the legislature here, and I can go into that later. But this session, there's a bill, HB 104, Abby, and it's been proposed by this guy, Rex P. Ship. And he's from Cedar City, which is a town in sort of south central Utah. It's actually a great little town. And part of what HB 104 is calling for would be annual firearms training for school kids between kindergarten and sixth grade. And this is one of those where, there's a lot of talk about responsible gun ownership. I have many, many friends here in Utah. I mean, you could basically, if you're 18 and don't have a felony, they'll basically give you an AR-15 here. This isn't even about gun control, Abby, as opposed to the idea of this is ridiculous. I mean, so it says a law enforcement officer has to conduct these trainings. I mean, can you imagine, just for a moment, a group of 5-year-olds, right, with a 9 millimeter? First of all, could they carry it? Second of all, what are they going to use? Lady Derringers? But the liability here, to me, is aside from it just being a ridiculous idea and frankly militarizing our children, it just seems like what are you thinking? I mean, I know it's an ideological thing. I get that. But this is where I think the ideological and and reality run into one another, which is how can you possibly think this is a good idea? How can you possibly think kids from the ages of 5 to 11 right? Running around with, I mean, somebody's going to shoot another kid, right? It's just, I mean, I don't understand how this doesn't happen. And I don't think that they're going to have like the big circle where everybody sits crisscross applesauce in the kindergarten room and be, playing spin the 9 millimeter. But it just seems ridiculous on its face. This is not like a thing. Like, are you going to have elementary school kids like with a little holster on their hip, and if the school shooter comes in, we're now asking these kids to defend themselves. And there's also been these ideas of arming teachers, which is another bad idea. But it's one of those where even I, who am rarely surprised by anything, Abby, was just like, this guy is a true schmuck if he thinks this is a good idea.
Well, it's beyond shenanigans. It's beyond shenanigans. And so I'm just like, I'm curious though, like, what is his reasoning for this? Like, is he saying why he believes that 5 to 11-year-olds need gun
Because we
training?
need to be better gun owners. Everyone should be a gun owner, which is just, again, makes no sense to me. He's always been a shill for the firearms industry, this guy's Ship. But again, I think it is a shenanigan, and maybe it is to enrage people like me. Maybe that's all it is. But this is why, even if it enrages me and confuses me and frustrates me, we should take it seriously, because based on the bill language I've read, if it passes and Spencer Cox, the governor, signs it, it takes effect July of 2025, which means it would be in effect for the next school year. So what you're
Why do
saying is
we, it's
right.
like a weird child soldiers thing. Like, it's like, I don't understand why this is something that should happen. Like,
I don't either, and that's, to me, again, it's this
we
weird thing where,
shouldn't we shouldn't be passing legislation to make kids be more effective at handling guns. We should be passing legislation that makes it harder for kids to get guns.
right, or for
And
those who do not, who should not have weapons, to have them.
exactly, like that is, I don't know. Again, beyond shenanigans.
I know, and it's just one of those where the reason I brought it up was because when I saw it, I was, it made me shake my head, and then I sort of got more and more wound up about it. Is that there are now so many states, Utah, Idaho, the Dakotas, Montana, the old Confederacy, that more and more of this stuff will happen. And so when people say, oh, well, if, Trump goes in 2028, a lot of this stuff will die. This stuff has seeped through. The poison has seeped in deep to so many of these places, and it's not going to be easy to get it out. And I think that's one thing too, just to bring it back to electoral politics, as you and I have talked about, and some things that we'll be working on, is like, I don't care if it's a Democrat, I don't care if it's an independent. Like, some non-MAGA Republicans got to start winning some races someplace, right? Is I know I get stuck in the prism, Abby, of seeing everything through campaigns, because that's the idiom in which I typically live. But if Democrats aren't going to figure out how to win some places, then there's going to be plenty of other folks, me included, who will start to go figure out, okay, can I get an independent at least competitive in this place? Because what we're on the path for now is bad stuff. And as you know, in your home state of Minnesota, right, I believe both houses of the legislature are 50-50 right now. Maybe 51-49 another, but very closely run, very closely run. You could make an argument that it would not take much. I don't know if Tim Walz can run again, but if he can't, you could make an argument that in 2026, that a Republican could win the governorship, and the Republicans could take enough seats in both legislatures where they start you use the word shenanigan. I think that's right. The shenanigan of redistricting and everything else, which will be upon us. And so I beseech our Democratic friends to get in the game. And if you are going to run in Minnesota, run as a Minnesota Democrat, right? Is it the Farm Labor Party there? Is that Minnesota? The DFL.
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
right? If you're going to run in Maryland, run as a Maryland Democrat. If you're going to run in Arizona, run as an Arizona Democrat, which is what, despite all of these people getting mad at Ruben Gallego for signing on to an immigration bill, like, that's the race he ran. He
Yeah.
told you the kind of Democrat he was going to be, which is a border state Democrat in a purple state, when even Latino voters are saying, no, we want more enforcement at the border. I'm not saying that we should be rounding people up, willy nilly like we're seeing, Abby. But like at some point, you need to bow to the political reality that the vast majority of American people do think the border is an issue, right? And that doesn't mean that you need to be okay with kids in cages or concentration camps, but it needs to say that if you want to be a broad based party like the Democratic Party needs to be, then the Ruben Gallegos of your world are the people who are going to lead you out of it. They're not the apostates.
Yeah. And well, it's so funny that you bring up Minnesota. Minnesota's weird. People need to recall this. We did elect Jesse Ventura
Mm-hmm.
as a governor. Um Jesse the Body Ventura, for those who might not
Right.
be as familiar. And uh, the other thing to kind of talk about Minnesota is when you look back to 2016, who won in the state? Bernie Sanders and Marco Rubio.
Right.
It was like the only state basically that Marco Rubio won in the primary. And Bernie won state. So it's like it is an interesting place, but sort of it's one of these things where there is a unique kind of I think a lot of individuals probably think Minnesota is like a red state, when in reality it's very blue. But the voter base, I think, is very reflective of this kind of like broader ideology that is taking root and hold elsewhere, where it's just like people are looking for policies that impact them and that will improve their lives. The Minnesota voter is sort of a fascinating thing, and I would,
Mm-hmm.
I could go on and on about, who makes up the base there in the state. Um, but I do think there is a reality around this idea of messaging and
Mm-hmm.
what Democrats are and are not doing and how they are or are not appealing to individuals. When the scary thing is when we're looking at the bill in Utah about, arming babies, basically. Um, it's one of the things is it is likely intended to make individuals like you and I angry,
Mm-hmm.
get the media upset, get individuals upset. Like that idea of sort of seeking this reaction and reactionary politics. But the reality is, and the scary thing is, it's like if that is the ultimate goal, like I highly doubt that this man who introduced this bill, maybe he does, but does he really want like 6-year-olds strapped? Like, I probably not. But he wants people to react to the bill. But the scary thing is, like, if it does pass, that has a real impact on people. And I think Democrats need to figure out a way to um, message so that they aren't just reactionary
Right.
and they're telling people what it is that they're going to do for them if they are in power. And again, like Minnesota is an interesting state. Like Jesse Ventura was saying something that appealed to people, including my mom. It was like a big issue in my parents' marriage. But like, I think you have to think about sort of what is the message? What are you trying to say? It cannot continue to be reactionary and anti. It cannot be anti-Trump. It cannot be anti-Republican. It cannot be anti, you know,
Right.
whatever mega acolyte is like up in the mix, you know? And I think the key is like Democrats need to figure out, okay, what are you actually trying to say? Who are you trying to message toward? And then reverse engineer it from there.
Yes, and I mean, I want to go back to this idea of reaction because I am someone who I have most folks on the show haven't seen it or heard it, but I do have the ability to have a fairly hair trigger, as many people who've known me throughout my life can attest. And I have been working on the difference between reacting, which is snap, and responding. Responding means you've taken a few breaths, you've assessed the situation, even quickly, and said, "Here's what I think we should do," or "Here's my feeling on what it means and what I think should be done in response, not in reaction." And I think that's a really important thing. Is everybody is on this hair trigger as far as anything that's said and done, and you have to say, "Okay, yeah, this guy, this Rex Ship goon, right? Why is he doing it?" I don't know. Maybe he really does believe that 7-year-olds should be carrying Desert Eagles on their hips. I don't know. But
What a weird mentality, though, if that is the
that
case.
is a
Like,
weird
what?
mentality. But there is a
Like,
fetishization of firearms among many on the right in this country. But here's where I think it gets difficult to go back to Minnesota. I remember doing an interview with a Minneapolis radio station years right after the 2016 campaign, and there was a guy who called in and said, I'm a hunter. I go get my buck every year, and then I put my rifle away. I am not a gun nut, right? I am not someone who believes that everybody who can have a gun, or guns should be available, should be handed out. There should be regulations. But they tell me because I'm a hunter, right, that I'm some sort of freak. I'm not a freak. And we even saw that with Tim Waltz, right?
Yep.
Tim Waltz, Tim Waltz was
Tim Waltz could message very well around guns.
he
And I thought
could,
that,
but they didn't let him, right? And then
yeah,
and then it was like, oh yeah, no, I've got a Glock at home. Like, maybe you do, but it's not like anybody believes it, right? It's not you're not a believer. I mean, the the Harris family that is not a believable messenger on that issue. And again, I'm not a gun guy, never have been. I think it's me to me, kids dying in school does not fall second behind the Second Amendment, if that makes sense. Like that's it's part of the sacrifice we have to make for our rights. Like it's not dead kids. I mean, firearms. Not to get off on a rant, but firearms are the leading cause of death for children in this country. That's an outrage.
terrifying.
That's an outrage. And it doesn't have, and that's the other part. It's entirely preventable. It doesn't have to happen. But like so many things, right? The argument has been moved so far. I'm not even going to say to the right because I don't think that's conservative, Abby. It's been moved so far into an extreme position, and the extremists are so good at messaging around it that anytime you say this is unacceptable, kids shouldn't die at school, that you're for confiscation. I mean, no, but that's a
Right.
practicality thing as much as anything else. Like there are a lot of guys out there who have 18 guns. I'm not entirely sure if they think they're in the Matrix, Abby, right? That they think they're going to be like Neo who can like do all this stuff
Or
in
go
slow
through
motion.
the bank scene where they're like,
Yeah, exactly. Like
remove
that's
any like keys and coins, and then they're
right.
like
Like that's
strapped.
not how it
Yeah.
works, right? Like if the bad guys want to come for you, and they will typically be bad guys with badges, right? Not the communist hordes coming to take over your homestead. Like they're going to get you. Um,
Well, I think too, like to your point, and I think there is so much space for Democrats to message around this. Like when we're talking about school and guns in school, obviously access to firearms is, a huge part of it, but it's also this taking a step back and what else are you investing in your state, in your country? You think about investment in education, investment
mhm.
in mental health services. Like those are critical things that the Democrats want to do and do in terms of their policies. And yet, like obviously there are conversations happening around it, but I think the messaging could be stronger around, getting to some of these other issues that are sort of at the root of the, frankly, like epidemic that we are having in terms of school shootings in the United States. Like we
There, we
are
just
an
had another one in
anomaly.
Nashville this week.
Exactly. We are an anomaly worldwide in terms of the prevalence and rate of such shootings. Like, and I think people need to it isn't about taking away a gun from a hunter. There are these other root issues that need to be addressed. And I think when we're looking at, the conversation around the Second Amendment and all that, it's very the last time we passed a federal gun safety law, which has since expired, was right after Columbine. The NRA then went into states and from the grassroots level up, invested all of this money and all of
Mhm.
this time to build up a political infrastructure and ecosystem that has created this environment that we're seeing right now, wherein, you know, at once that legislation expired, like we've not even after uh, Sandy Hook, Congress wasn't able to pass, comprehensive gun legislation. And so I think one of the things is to like really see that there was this investment from local, state levels that has created an environment wherein these issues are not being addressed because of sort of the stranglehold, so to speak, that the NRA has had. But it goes back to it's very similar around the reproductive rights issue. It's very similar around Roe v. Wade. That is what happened. Sort of this idea that Republicans, or really conservatives rather, have been playing a long game in terms of their political and financial investments for these moments, for, the Dobbs decision, for, if there's a school shooting and, Congress is trying to pass bills. Like, they're playing a different game, whereas Democrats are, they need to get in the long game, is long story long, how I'll
Listen,
put it.
listen. I mean, I have been screaming this from the mountaintops. I have so many books up here from very smart people who have studied this. As I've said, we talked at the top of the episode about the people in Orange County in the 1950s and 1960s. A lot of these things began at the 1964 Barry Goldwater Convention. A lot more
Phyllis
of it.
Schlafly. What's her name? Phyllis Schlafly?
Phyllis Schlafly, right? A lot of this was, in response to now the late President Jimmy Carter being elected in 1976 as a Southern Democratic evangelical, and the evangelical movements like Jerry Falwell saying we can't have that, right? We've got to fight. Remember that the evangelicals movement was pro Roe v. Wade when it was decided. They thought it was a fair and equitable decision that allowed for everyone of every belief to, abide by the strictures of their faith or their principles. It was only when they realized, oh God, the evangelicals could be Democrats after Jimmy Carter, that they decided to make that an issue, right? Which also shows you that it is not about the issue of abortion. I don't doubt for some,
It
and
is about the
even
issue of power.
it's about the issue of power. Yes, exactly. And that's the other part of it, which is so much of what we're seeing from Trump on down is underpinned by bullshit. It is simply a means to an end. But to your point, Abby, they have been willing to work at it 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years in some cases to do it. While we have our friends in the Democratic Party who are like, it's all about the presidency, it's all about federal, it's all about this, where 1,100 seats in the Obama administration, legislative seats, boop, gone. And now, as we move forward for the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, it will be upon us to go get enough of those seats back to put the brakes on this stuff. But it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be sexy. It's not going to be fast. It's not going to be based on a great ad or, some whiz bang data collection, right? It's going to be one person meeting another person, finding someone we can recruit to get on the ballot. And I might have said this already, and I'm sorry to be off on a rant. I would run people, even places like here in Utah, where, like, what's your issue set? I'm decent, I'm common sense, I'm competent. That's it. That's all I'm running on. I'm not running on anything else. Well, what does that mean for X, Y? It doesn't matter, right? Because the goon over there, I promise you, whatever he claims to be for, he's not for any of it. It's just about making sure typically he gets to keep his seat and gets to tell you what to do. Like, I'm not interested in telling you what to do. I'm interested in listening to you and representing you. I don't think it has to be more complicated than that, because clearly Americans aren't worried about issues, right? Like, elections have never been about policy. They've always been beauty contests. Personality.
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned Jesse Ventura. Why did Jesse Ventura get elected? Well, it was a strange time, but also he had a radio show for years, 4 hours a day. Right? He was
Hmm.
somebody who'd entered the body politic. He'd been a movie star. He'd been a
Was that a
wrestler.
pun? Was that a pun on body politic?
Ah, it wasn't, but you recognized it because you're
Yeah.
smarter than I am. He'd been a Navy SEAL, right? Now he's sort of a conspiracy theorist living in Baja, but who cares? He understood the nature of it, but even then, he only ran for one term. He's like, actually, I don't want to do this anymore, right? Like, being governor, I think it was probably a fascinating time. Someone should write a book, Abby, about Jesse Ventura's time in office. But, but he was a celebrity. He's like, I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah, well, and I actually think that Jesse Ventura, well, you can't say that because Reagan was really like the first celebrity politician. But like when we're looking at Trump, like I do feel something so commensurate is Jesse Ventura and his victory. And I remember kids in my elementary school wearing t-shirts that said like my governor can beat up your governor. Like that was
Right.
a thing. And that was peak WWE phase, which my parents wouldn't let me watch. But it was just sort of like a strange time. But the reality was is like there was something about Jesse Ventura that was able to connect with like Minnesotans,
Yeah.
my mom among them, which like I hope she's okay with me sharing that. But my dad was like, no.
No.
But it was just sort of uh this strange period, but there was something about him that appealed to people. And I think when we're looking at connective tissue, there's something very similar about Donald Trump that there was about Jesse Ventura. Also, Donald Trump was similarly appeared on WWE.
I was going to say,
So it's like, yeah,
maybe, look, you know what? You say
it's the
that, but
McMahons. It's the McMahons. They're
but you
the
say that, but I would venture to say that, and I was actually talking to a buddy of mine the other day who had just taken his children to a WWE thing. And it's interesting to bring this up. He said, there's every ethnicity, every economic
Yep.
demographic, men and women, kids, and everybody's screaming and having a good time. Right. Now, I appreciate that insight. One, because I've never been to a wrestling match. I used to watch
I
it in like
have.
in the late '90s when a buddy of mine had like we had an apartment. We had the two like recliners like Joey and Chandler. We literally had that set up in our apartment, and we would drink beer and we would watch WWE. I think we were 21 or 22, and then we would play NASCAR on our Sega. So like we were that demo,
Similar.
right? We were that
Yep.
demo, and that's something that we need to maybe take our noses out of the air and say, okay, well, this is a multi-gajillion dollar operation that is clearly getting people all over the country and the world to tune into. Maybe we should take a hint from them, even if it's not normally the place you'd spend your time.
Well, and this is so far, of course, a little bit, but to your point of every demographic, I went to a WWE show with a ex-boyfriend of mine who was a Bernie Sanders voter from Vermont. So like hardcore Bernie, and we're going to WWE. So
Right,
it's like to your point, like there is this mass appeal of it, and but also like an exposure level that I think is unique, and I can't really discount it. I don't know. I think this notion or this idea that individuals are one-dimensional creatures is a
right,
fallacy, and I think that's the problem. Like I think Democrats are trying to bucket people, and trying to like operate as though, every individual that falls under X category has the same identity, interests, and needs.
right,
When in reality, like that is not the case. And I think you really saw that in this past election cycle with Donald Trump's like appeal to Latino men, I think is a very indicative aspect of that.
right,
Um, yeah, it's people need to stop trying to put people in boxes and just message around things that affect people in their day-to-day life and really push that. And
right.
you cannot always just be the opposition party, particularly when you are the party in power, which is what we
Right.
saw this last election cycle when Joe Biden was president, I believe.
Well, I think Republicans probably have more responsibility on the bucketing, with the micro targeting that when the 2004 Bush campaign, we did that, and it was that famous. If you drink Chardonnay and drive a Mercedes, you're a Democrat, and if you drink Budweiser and drive a pickup truck, you're a Republican. Maybe that Venn diagram still largely lines up, Abby, but my guess is it lines up a
I
lot
don't,
less than it did 20 years ago.
yeah, I
Right.
don't think so.
No. All right. Well, this has been a fascinating journey through politics and Americana. Abby, before we let you go, where can our listeners and viewers find you online?
Yes, on X, I'm at Abigail Tracy, and on Instagram, I'm at Abby Tracy.
And as always, gang, you can find me on X and TikTok, as long as they're around, at Reed Galen. Also on Instagram and Threads at Reed_Galen USA. I think I'm also on Blue Sky. I don't know. But I do need you to go to SezUs, SEZ.us, the social media site for sanity. We are now in the App Store and the Google Play Store. Get out there. And as always, gang, join the union.us. Get involved, everybody. Come and see a WWE show with me. Actually, I might go do that. It's probably good for
They're
me
actually
and
really fun.
all
They're
right.
actually really fun.
All right. We will do a remote from a WWE show. We got to look at the calendar, but we'll make it happen. Listen, Abby, thanks as always for joining me.
Thank you.
And everybody else, we'll see you next time.